baseline. This is particularly alarming because the oceans absorb huge amounts every year, and still there's an increase in temperature. If left unchecked, this will continue to drastically damage the Earth and its inhabitants. Some may ask, why is this 1 degree increase alarming? The world is so large, it shouldn't be a problem, right? Actually, 1 degree is a lot. First, water absorbs lots of heat before the surface temperature itself rises. Imagine the vastness of an ocean and how much water they contain globally. Now, try to imagine how much heat it would take to make all the ocean water on Earth collectively rise 1 degree. This means that we are slowly edging towards the tipping point of climate change. Of course, there isn't a specific predicted date or year in which global warming will cause the end of the world. However, there are approximated year ranges of when the global average temperature will have risen by 1.5 to 2 degrees. The baseline being mid to late 19th century, right when the Industrial Revolution began. According to most calculations, the tipping point is likely to be from 1 degree Celsius, which is where we're at now, to 2 degrees Celsius. We will most likely reach 2 degrees in 31 years. That is, if we continue current emission rates, or in 22 years if we increase emission rates, which is not entirely unlikely. Globally, natural disasters and subsequent economic losses have become increasingly impactful because of climate change. Both wildlife ecosystems and human habitats have been negatively impacted, from rising sea levels to alarming frequency of severe weather events around the world. Attempts towards alleviating these effects of global warming have often been at odds and remain divided among a multitude of strategies, reducing the overall effectiveness of these efforts. It is evident that the collaborative action is required for avoiding the most severe consequences of climate change. This presentation evaluates the main strategies towards both mitigating and adapting to climate change. Lastly, it provides an optimal combination of 7 solutions which can be implemented simultaneously, working in tandem to limit and otherwise accommodate the harmful effects of climate change.
Right, so just expanding on what Mary said, in response to climate change, humanity developed a lot of solutions, and NASA classified them into 2 categories. We have mitigation solutions and we have adaptation solutions. So mitigation solutions basically combat climate change directly by removing carbon dioxide straight away from the atmosphere and thus decreasing the effects of climate change. So, for example, technologies such as afforestation or other negative NETs that are in fact are mitigation solutions. And then we have adaptation solutions, which help adapt vulnerable areas who are exposed to the impacts of climate change to help adapt to those effects. So for example, if we have floods or wildfires or environmental hazards, adaptation solutions help us prevent those from happening or decrease the impacts left on those regions. And another thing about solutions is that if we implement a lot of them together, they actually work together better as opposed to if you just implement them individually. So it's not just 1 + 1 = 2, right? When you implement multiple solutions together, the benefits multiply themselves, they complement each other. And so that's why we proposed a optimal combination of solutions instead of just choosing the best one to implement, because you have to account for all aspects of the problem that we're addressing, and the solutions that we propose, they help each other out and reach a wider variety of aspects. So what we did in this paper is essentially we evaluated 23 commonly discussed solutions on the table right now, and then we evaluated them and then developed our own optimal combination. So without further ado, we're going to get into each of the solutions, starting with the economic and political ones. So That's going to be cap and trade, carbon tax, organizational and private investments, government subsidies and programs, as well as direct or indirect aid to foreign countries. And we're going to go into them one by one. Starting off with cap and trade. So this cap and trade system is an economic system that a government implements, and it's composed of a rigid cap and a flexible trading market. So what the cap is basically a cap like implemented over all the companies, and it is the cap of emissions that each company can emit. And this cap decreases over time, and companies who exceed this limit will be financially penalized. So say we have a company and they're emitting 250 tons of CO2 per year. The government implements a cap and trade system setting the cap to 200 tons. So the company will be emitting over the 200-ton cap, and they will be financially penalized. The trade system, however, allows firms to buy and sell the government caps with one another. So it makes it more flexible, and it incentivizes businesses to choose the most cost-effective solution to decrease emissions. So as you can see in the chart at the right, this is a prime example of how cap and trade works, right? So say that firm A and firm B are producing X and Y tons respectively in the status quo of carbon. However, the government issued firm A a cap of X minus 50 tons and issued firm B a cap of Y plus 50 tons. That means firm A is currently emitting 50 tons over the cap, and firm B is actually emitting 50 tons below the cap. Firm A is now facing a $100,000 fine, while firm B doesn't have to pay anything because they are emitting below the cap. So what they can do under the cap and trade system, and this is where the trade aspect comes in, is firm A can buy 50 tons of allowance from firm B, so that firm A now, instead of having X minus 50 tons of allowance, it now has exactly X tons of allowance, so it doesn't have to pay any fine to the government anymore. Now, firm B sold their extra 50 tons of allowance to firm A, so now it's emitting at exactly their cap as well, but also made a profit because it sold 50 tons of allowance to firm A. So this is a win-win situation for all companies, and that's how it incentivizes them to choose the most cost-effective solution to decrease their emissions. This is just really flexible because you're not just hard capping the firms at a certain rate so that they have to change something. They have their own choices. They can meet the cap by decreasing their emissions, or they can change the cap by buying or selling caps with other companies. So next is the carbon tax, and that's pretty much the exact opposite of a cap and trade system in that it's really, really rigid, because the amount of tax that you have to pay is strictly proportional to the amount of carbon that a firm emits. So if you emit 1 ton of carbon, you may be able be charged with $30 of fine for every ton of carbon you emit. And if you emit 10 tons of carbon, you have to pay $200 worth of fine. So it's strictly proportional for all firms, and there's no trade aspect. It's not flexible. The challenges for this, however, is the difficulty in finding a price consensus in the government. So in Congress, the reason we don't have a national carbon tax system right now is they can't agree on the price to set for each ton of tax on all the companies. And so there's always debates, there's always disagreements, and that's why there isn't progress so far. Big business retaliations, right? If you're an oil company, you probably will speak against a carbon tax like this. You will try to lobby Congress, you will try to speak against it, vote against it, and ultimately hinder in progress. And also another challenge for carbon tax is it disproportionately hurts low-income Americans, because a lot of low-income civilians, they drive fossil fuel cars, while like upper class Americans now, they drive Tesla or other electric cars, so they don't have to pay the carbon tax because they are not emitting carbon. However, the price will fall down to the low-income Americans will have to pay higher prices for gas because the oil companies are paying their carbon tax now. However, the benefits for carbon tax is its high return revenue, right? Because you're taxing so many companies, the government receives a lot of tax revenue that they can use to fund more research development or other climate change combating programs. Organizational private investments. This is pretty straightforward. It's exactly what it sounds like. The government isn't enough to combat climate change alone. And so this is where organizations and private investors come in. They might invest in stocks of climate change combating companies or programs that the government implement to help donate or fund those efforts. However, there are some obstacles to that because right now the climate change policy framework is very immature because all these stocks are relatively new compared to the stocks of really old companies and stable companies like Apple or other oil companies. The other obstacles include that the perception that the returns of renewable stocks are too low. So why would I invest in a climate change company if I won't get a lot of money out of it compared to other big companies, right? And so that's why a lot of private investors don't turn to those stocks. Along with technology risks, lack of proven knowledge, and disinterest from politicians or political biases. Despite these obstacles, the UN estimates that $205 billion of additional investments is needed. And so unless something is done, it will be really hard for organizations and private investors to reach that $200 billion goal. Government subsidies and programs. So this is where the government comes in. As you can see right now, the government puts a lot of its subsidies in coal and oil, natural gas funding rather than wind and renewable funding, right? And as it states here in the US, the government has paid $145 billion for nuclear power and fossil fuels, while renewable energy technologies has only received a total of $34 billion. And the main hindrance to implement subsidies is its high cost, right? Because you are directly funding these programs and subsidies, you just throw money into them. And that's why a lot of politicians are reluctant to put new renewable budgets into the national budget. And yeah, these programs and subsidies, they can come in a lot of different types. It's not just financially funding. You can also, it's not just you're throwing money against climate change, right? You're investing in research and development, you're funding renewable energy subsidies and so on. Okay, aid to other countries. So just America doing something isn't sufficient, right? Even if America reaches 0% carbon emissions, even if we're not releasing any carbon at all, if the rest of the world is still releasing a lot of carbon into the atmosphere, then we're not really solving the problem at all because we're living on the same planet, we're breathing the same air from the same atmosphere. And so an important thing for the US, which has an outsized role in the global financial sector, is to combat climate change and along with its peers and motivate other countries to do so as well. And an important part of this is to aid third world countries, as impacts will still be minimal if only a small portion of the globe is taking or can take initiative. So poor countries who don't have the budget to focus their efforts on climate change will need help from the United States to combat climate change as well. And so that's why I included aid to the other countries as an important solution in the economic section. So as a summary, we had carbon tax, cap and trade, investments, government action, and international aid. Each of them comes with different benefits. Each of them comes with consequences, but all of them are crucial to address different aspects of climate change.
So I'll be taking over. I'll be explaining kind of like the second section of the paper. So for one of those sections is the agricultural and agroforestry section, which has 4 technologies: afforestation and reforestation, bioenergy capture, carbon capture and storage, or BECCS, bioengineering, or BE of crops and genetically modified organisms, and irrigation system. So for first of the technology, which is afforestation and reforestation, it's basically a very simple idea of basically the reverse of deforestation. And one of the example is the Green Belt Movement, or known as the GBM, and it's founded in 1977 by Wangari Maathai, who planted 51 million trees in Kenya and restored about 850 hectares of the countryside in 2018. So afforestation is basically into introduction of trees and plants to clearings, wasteland, and arid barren areas, and reforestation is the restoration or reintroduction of forests experiencing a significant decrease in tree population due to either deforestation, wildfire, and other natural and man-made disasters. So by introducing these additional new trees and plants into near barren lands, afforestation and reforestation can help to prevent topsoil runoff and erosion. So therefore, an improved, cleaner environments can assist in preserving endangered organisms and increasing the biodiversity of that area. And one of the concerns is that forest management can lead to the loss of land for urban development, biodiversity, agriculture, housing, and other public infrastructures, and also ecotourism. And those implemented solely for economic benefits and entertainment can bring more litter and destruction into the forest and habitats rather than preserving them. So expanding forest landmass can ultimately increase the land value and scarcity, which then contribute to an escalation of property prices. And afforestation and reforestation are widely executed by many states and regions. By 2008, 2,960 million trees are planted in about 1,080,000 hectares of South Korea land, bringing an alliance between South and North Korea on this matter. So expanding forest landmass increases the land value and scarcity, which then contribute to the escalation of property prices, which was one of the concerns. Next. The second technology is bioengineering carbon capture and storage, which also known as BECCS. And in combating climate change, about with the majority of them in Europe and North America. And currently 6 of these 23 remain in operation, capturing CO2 from ethanol biorefinery plants and MSW, or municipal solid waste recycling centers. And in 2019, 5 facilities are actively capturing about 1.5 million tons of CO2 per year worldwide through this technology. So what is BECCS really? It's not that complicated technology. It's essentially one of the negative emission technology, or known as NET, a mitigation strategy. And this technology entails the burning of biomass, such as forest wood and fast-growing energy crops like barley, wheat, and the CO2 emitted from the process is captured in a long-term underground storage. So like afforestation and reforestation, BECCS implementation is also distributed worldwide. However, governments should take into consideration and research, development, and demonstration, or known as the RD&D, life cycle analysis, cultural policies, finance mechanism, and cross-cutting consideration should be promoted and implemented for maximized benefits to be received from this program. The third technology would be bioengineering of crops and genetically modified organisms. So with limited water and a degrading soil health caused by climate change, food insecurity will continue to decrease if no action are taken. And one of the possible adaptation strategy to climate change is this bioengineering of crops, and which is basically the alteration of the crop's DNA, genes, and alleles, which allows farmers to yield crop productivity with smaller land areas. So one of the strategy would be traditional breeding, which is established by Gregor Mendel in the 1860s, focuses on the selection of desirable alleles and crossbreeding these selected crops together. The next one will be mutagenesis, which is a technique using chemicals and radiation that efficiently detects and escalates a targeted genome or DNA sequence. And an RNA interference presents itself as a mechanism that can inhibit certain gene expression. Transgenesis involves transferring a section of the desired gene from one organism to another in specific locations to promote chosen traits. And this method requires further testing for implementation outside of organic use, but it can affect approximately 1 to 3 genes during each transfer process. Gene editing techniques includes the cluster regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats, or CRISPR, that alters the genes through identification of the problematic genes and conduct operations to alter these genes to the desired form and script. And even with testing required and an unknown certainty of organic utilization, it can accurately affect at least 1 to 3 genes when applied, ending with a result that is much more specific, controlled, and predictable. So with bioengineering of crops and the genetically modified organisms, the product can become much more resistant to the degrading environment on Earth, which is caused by climate change. And as a result, a greater portion of these crops will be saved from unpredictable natural disasters, such as drought or flooding, and with better security, larger agricultural land degradation, and a higher production, food security can increase dramatically. Next. So the reason we put irrigation system in is because the average agricultural water consumption 70% of the global freshwater consumption annually, and about 40% of that water consumption is wasted through primitive irrigation practices and failure of resource management. Some fruits and vegetables require more water usage than others. So to put it in perspective, if you want to grow 1 pound of wheat, that would use about 130 gallons of water. It might sound a lot, but if you compare it to the same quantity of coffee, it would require about 2,500 gallons, and now that's a lot. So some of the specific technologies used in the irrigation system would be the drip irrigation, and that's basically a dripping system that maintains the soil moisture at a fixed level through water emitting technologies, and it tightly controls the water consumption up to 90% water usage efficiency, and provides a much more effective and efficient way of applying chemicals and fertilizer to the soil. And with the more developed technologies, the accuracy of water usage can be greatly improved. And the most recent irrigation system is the Airdrop irrigation system. And this technology essentially harvests water, or H2 molecules, basically they're moisture droplets from the air, through a turbine that drives and cools the air to the underground space during the condensation process until it reaches 100% humidity, resulting in condensate formation. And the produced water, which is stored in an underground tank, is then pumped to the roots of the plants during the watering process. And because the airdrop irrigation system is a low-tech, self-sufficient solar power solution, it is suitable for arid and semi-arid land where water shortage presents as a recurring problem, so less water can be needed, which will be used in a more cost-effective system. So with better economic management and public awareness, better and more developed technologies and instruments can be applied to integrate the overall benefit provided by the system. And by implementing systems such as the drip and airdrop irrigation system, water usage can be substantially decreased, and artificial ponds, lake, and reservoir can supply farmers with a constant water supply, relieving otherwise persistent water shortage pressure in some regions. So my next section will be the geological section, and it contains two technology, which is the geologic reservoir sequestration and soil carbon sequestration. The geologic reservoir sequestration is basically a mitigation strategy used after CO2 is captured at the point of emission from industrial capture method. And this is done by storing captured CO2 in deep underground geological formation through physical or chemical implementations. And it is crucial for organizations to pinpoint the most optimal location for such implementation. And this technology would usually be used as a complementary technology of others, for example, BECCS. And this process, however, may generate a large consumption of fossil fuel if no cleaner energy sources are broadly adopted, because the transportation process entails extra cost and energy and emits a considerable amount of CO2 itself, which undermines the strategy's intent. In addition, an increase in energy and resource consumption can be observed through the construction and operation of such facilities. So as a contemporary of BECCS, geologic reservoir sequestration has been implemented in only a few instances and is still largely in its developmental stage. Similar use of this strategy can be further adopted as the technology more fully develops. So for example, carbon transportation, pipe leakage prevention, injection method, and architectures, and etc. One of the main examples of soil carbon sequestration is the 4 per 1,000 initiative, which is one of the many of these soil carbon sequestration organizations and initiatives. And basically, it aims to increase plant and soil carbon absorption and storage by about 4% every year through afforestation and other agroecological practices. And throughout human history, most anthropogenic soil alteration usually resulted in a degradation of up to 70% of the soil carbon storage. And other practices such as changes in agricultural method and restoration of forests, grassland, and wetlands can all yield increases in soil carbon stored. Residents and farmers are encouraged to better understand the details of new techniques and their role in increasing soil carbon storage. Transitions from one agricultural technique to another requires time and money, so providing a considerable amount of financial support can efficiently improve the smoothness of this transition. And the composition of soil varies worldwide, so to truly understand which species of plants or crops and farming techniques are best for a specific region would require a large amount of research. And similarly, a technique called blue carbon, which might be discussed further in the following section, serves the same purpose as soil carbon sequestration, only here sequestration is implemented in coastal and other regions involving bodies of water like mangroves, tidal marshland, seagrass beds, and other tidal or saltwater wetlands. So for coastal and oceanic areas, the ocean CO2 removal techniques are separated into 4 general subsections. Ecosystem restoration, which would involve mangrove, seaweed, wetland restoration, marine permaculture, and restocking whale population. And then we have ocean fertilization, which would be iron, nitrogen, phosphorus fertilization, and artificial upwelling or downwelling. And then we have modification of ocean chemistry, which are like ocean alkalinity enhancement and seawater CO2 stripping, and CO2 storage, which are like seabed and sub-seabed storage of CO2 captured on land, and deep sea storage of crop waste, macroalgae deposition, and so on. Although not all of the listed solutions will be explored, some of the most optimal and beneficial subsections and solutions are included in this section of the paper. Next. As for the ocean alkalinity enhancement, the reason we included this is because the ocean presents many concerns, such as sea level and temperature rise, melting of polar ice caps, and ecosystem and biohabitat imbalances. And a mitigation strategy like this can be implemented, which can accelerate the natural process by chemically lock away CO2 from the atmosphere in the ocean basin for hundreds and perhaps thousands of years. Alkalinity can neutralize ocean acidity through alkaline minerals like limestone and basalt, and basically result in weathering and eroding. So when ocean alkalinity enhancement is implemented to scale in proportion to the threat posed by climate change, a significant amount of CO2 can be mitigated. However, the biggest concern regarding ocean alkalinity enhancement technology is the uncertainty of the processes. Biogeochemical side effects, such as alteration of ocean chemistry and damage to the marine ecosystem, are likely to be introduced by this mitigation strategy. Such changes can intensify the vulnerability of biodiversity, food security, resident health, water quality, etc., and possibly disrupt and degrade the local and even regional economics. Despite development in research on ocean alkalization and ocean chemistry associated techniques, ocean alkalinity enhancement technology still reside at an early theoretical level. And the government should consider that research, development, operation regulation, environmental restriction, and social sustainability should be applied and carried out to promote the beneficial factor of this technology, while not neglecting the negative effect it brings. So the next strategy would be the ocean fertilization, which basically utilizes the alteration of geoengineering on the ocean surface and ecosystem by adding nutrients like iron to the upper level of the ocean, which is the euphotic zone, to increase the phytoplankton population and activity, which would then increase the ocean's carbon extraction efficiency and capacity. Because this marine carbon and nutrient cycle is considerably complex, to safely implement this mitigation strategy, a detailed understanding of marine biology and a carbon nutrient cycle must be attained. And as the diagram shows, that's kind of like one of the simplified diagram of how the ocean level works and how the ecosystem interact with each other. As for this technology, calculation and data collection based on the current technological readiness and the time needed to reach full implementation reflect the technological feasibility of ocean fertilization and is comparatively low to other mitigation and adaptation strategy like reef restoration, renewable energy, vegetation, etc. And furthermore, the cost effectiveness is relatively lower than most other technologies on the same broad category, resulting in a desired good result with lesser economic input. So ultimately, to achieve high level of carbon extraction without provoking ocean eutrophication and or other negative effects, governments are recommended to establish restrictions, regulation, and distribution of resources, promoting ocean carbon uptake only within tight controls.
Okay, so now I will be talking about some of our industrial/energy solutions, which will involve finding cleaner alternative energy sources rather than coal or oil to generate energy and electricity. I will be talking about better replacements such as renewable energy and nuclear energy. Next. So renewable energy is energy that has zero, low, or neutral greenhouse gas emissions, which you will hear as GHG. The sources that they come from are also naturally restored or regenerated. Some of the advantages of renewable energy is that, in general, renewable energy increases job opportunities, and of course, they take advantage of renewed sources such as solar energy or wind energy. However, some renewable energy sources are intermittent, which means that they have a low capacity factor and are unable to produce energy every day. If the sun is not shining or if the wind is not blowing, there will be no solar or wind energy produced. In addition, some renewable energies require vast amounts of energy to start the process of production, and some have land or location requirements that are difficult to reach at a worldwide scale. Next. Going on to nuclear energy, I'm sure everyone here knows a little bit about nuclear energy, but actually production of nuclear energy is slowly declining. In 1996, there was about 18% of energy used that was produced from nuclear energy, but that figure has since then dropped to 11% today due to a lack of funding and public support, which I will discuss later. Nuclear energy has a high capacity factor, around 92%, which means that it is able to produce energy around 92% of the time. Nuclear energy also has substantial economic benefits and easily met land requirements. Next. So the plans for mitigating climate change involving the atmosphere include direct air capture, otherwise known as carbon, you can think of it as direct air capture, stratospheric aerosol injection, SAI, space mirrors, and marine sky brightening. Next. So direct air capture, otherwise known as carbon capture, utilization, and storage, is a type of negative emission technology, NET, and its goal is to chemically capture carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, then store the GHG greenhouse gas permanently into the soil or integrate it into a product, such as turning the carbon dioxide into the fizz of a soda, which has been done before and is currently in progress by some companies, such as Coca-Cola. DAC, or CCUS, does not need to be built on arable land, meaning that local food production will not be affected. However, DAC requires substantial amounts of energy and funding. Next. So stratospheric aerosol injection aims to spray large quantities of reflective particles into the stratosphere to achieve a cooling effect. This will reduce and/or reverse the effects of climate change. However, there is the possibility of military seizure and abuse by a country's government, and there could also be potential negative consequences regarding the stratosphere, such as no more blue skies in some areas, or even worse, astronomy and weather forecasting may be negatively affected due to the large quantity of chemicals injected into the stratosphere. Next. So next we have the space-based mirrors, which sounds almost comical, but believe me, this technology has been proven to be highly efficient based on simulations. One advantage of this technology is that they can be concentrated in specific areas that are most directly impacted by climate change, such as the North and South poles. However, the strategy is highly improbable because of high financial costs. In addition, there will also be unintended influences on the planet's various cycles, such as the cultivation of crops in certain areas. If implemented, this could only be short-term rather than long-term, because global warming is not the only effect of the large amounts of greenhouse gas emissions. For example, ocean acidification due to carbon dioxide is another issue that cannot be resolved by this strategy. Next. Marine sky brightening seeks to reflect sunlight back into space by enhancing cloud reflectivity. Seawater particles or synthesized chemicals are sprayed into clouds to increase reflection by clouds. This idea may seem similar to stratospheric aerosol injection, but it is located much closer to the Earth's surface and involves clouds rather than the stratosphere. There's very limited understanding of the complex relationships and nature of clouds, so extensive trials using actual clouds instead of only models and simulations are needed before this strategy can be seriously considered. Next. Lastly, for social solutions, I will be focusing on public awareness, youth education, and domestic funding. Please be aware that the following strategies are not so much solutions, but rather actions that we as a country and as a worldwide force of nature-loving citizens need to implement better to understand and support the science technologies mentioned before. Next. Public awareness, as well as youth education, as I will discuss later, are critical to domestic funding. For public awareness, communities must identify local issues and create solutions together that gives the members of the community a sense that global warming isn't something far, far away from them, but rather that it is local as well, impelling them to actively support mitigation and adaptation strategies to become more knowledgeable about them. For example, nuclear energy, as mentioned before, is often falsely associated with nuclear weapons and accidents, causing the decline in nuclear production. By using binding communication, separating politics and climate change, and improving access to simplified and still accurate information, community members will be more aware about climate change and take action to support the science technology that can solve it. Next. Youth education regarding climate change is very important because it involves the generation who will inherit the earth and its conditions. Unbiased education should be integrated into school curriculum that are taught to students or perhaps be part of science classes. Next. Domestic funding, as I mentioned before, is closely related to public awareness and youth education because public support will lead to more investments, both from private investors and the government, leading to the development of better and improved strategies.
So now that concludes the individual technology that we studied. And basically, after analyzing the solutions above in terms of potential effectiveness, financial feasibility, current readiness, and most importantly, compatibility, we drafted an optimal combination as a suggestion and reference for governments when making political decisions regarding climate change and corresponding actions. as shown in the figure right here. So as the combination draws from solutions in various topics, it has a better likelihood of resolving more aspects of the fundamental problem, complementing one another to increase benefits, again stressing the importance of forming a combination, incorporating both mitigation, which is labeled as M, and adaptation, which is labeled as A strategies. This combination merges and emphasizes the benefits acquired both from the selective negative emission technologies, which is NETs, like Aforestation, ocean alkalinity enhancement, and bioengineering, and governmental policy solutions like cap and trade, clean energy industry establishment and expansion, and international contract proposals, while constraining the concerns and side effects generated by each strategy to a minimum through a beneficial cycle of system. So as we can see, the first layer was separated into three general aspects of the kind of like the political side of the combination. Next. Oh, wait. Government itself must ensure that it is maintaining necessary progress in terms of political and legislative action, and specific suggestions for legislative action are listed in this figure under the U.S. government's political and legislative action section. And with the goal to increase support towards such efforts, raising awareness is vital, and thus so is the need to reform in the education system. All schools and other educational facilities in the U.S. need to incorporate a consistent and robust study of climate change into the curriculum. Detailed precautions of implementation of this curriculum can be found above. And secondly, the U.S. government needs to support adaptation for its agricultural sector. As climate change impacts the country, the agricultural sector faces especially destructive consequences from severe weather and the longer-term implication of the changing climate. Adaptation measures such as improving infrastructure, constructing dams, or other forms of crop protection and subsidies to farm most directly exposed to the impact should be considered. And third, scientific research targeted toward the sustainability of crops must be conducted to preserve maximum yield. The protection of the agricultural industry is crucial as it is responsible for maintaining the nation's food supply and occupies a major role in international trade. Extreme events caused by climate change, such as droughts and floods, have historically crumbled such area of the industry. And fourth, technological advancement should be supported. This refers to all types of technology for combating climate change efforts, including the development of more efficient NET or improvement of current ones. And fifth, the U.S. governments need to match and aid in efforts by non-governmental organizations already involved in research and investment. So the budget would come from either revenue generated by the cap and trade system recommended above or cuts in funding for less urgent issues. And finally, the government ultimately needs to interact with other countries through foreign policies. For instance, cooperation, discourse, economic pressure, and potentially political pressure are most of the time necessary for America to initiate a chain of desired actions. Drafting treaties with poor oversight or supervision, although commendable, ultimately will result in the lack of legitimate actions. Stepping beyond the stage of only discourse and into concrete actions is now needed to move forward on improved efforts for cooperation and results, which is on the global scale. And consequently, governments are encouraged to plan out a considerably large portion or fair portion of the total budget for climate change mitigation and adaptation strategy research and development purposes, about 5% of total spending, from such gains and the otherwise continuous increasing military budget. With other utilization of capital resources, countries are more likely to fund more critical technologies to combat climate change, resulting in a more realistic goal and achievement that can reduce climate change damage and threats far more effectively. Next. So to commence, climate intervention will have to come about through economic forces, driving countries in cooperation to change their former method and adopt new carbon-free practices that they decide are most efficient and cost-effective. Thus, the need for an economic framework that can compel the policymaker and other with the potential to bring out changes, like cooperation leaders, to reduce the need for energy derived from pollution-heavy sources is inevitable. From this, a cap-and-trade system is recommended, as described in the figure, since compared to the other proposed economic system mentioned in the paper, carbon tax, it is more flexibility in the marketplace. For instance, minimum government intervention will produce the best price for carbon credits, and establishment of this price will be assimilated into the market automatically. And on the other hand, a carbon tax would have the opposite effect on business, as its strict regulatory regime would lead to overall dissatisfaction from the entire industrial sector, making it harder to be cooperated with and risk politically charged lobbying or price spikes in consumer goods and services. Moreover, cap-and-trade systems bring with them more freedom to consumer by allowing them to shift their purchasing from a given company to its competitors, offering relatively lower cost products because they utilize the trading aspect of the cap-and-trade. So under the cap-and-trade and emission trading system category in this figure, it emphasizes that the system not only allows the government to better control the carbon emission of these large corporations, but it also generates additional revenue that can be implemented in the research and development investment, serving as a support for the other technologies implementation. Next. So in addition to an economic drive, direct financial investment, which includes government subsidies, donating, private investment, and funding from NGOs, are just as important. Specifically, research and investment shall be directed into renewable energy as described under the branch of investment and innovation in clean energy in the figure. And heated debates have occurred between supporters of nuclear energy and renewable energy, and this disunity of the scientific and political community have greatly hindered progress in legitimate action regarding the topic. Therefore, to ensure all aspects of the issue has been addressed, a blend of both clean energy sources is recommended, as a greater positive effect can be achieved with emphasis set around a cleaner defined goal that involves both energy source rather than unproductive disputes, which only serves to squander time and averts attention from the environmental to politics. And a coexistence of renewable energy and nuclear energy allows these clean energy forms to be utilized to their maximum potential. And for instance, nuclear plants can be established away from residential areas, and to compensate for the inflexibility and high time and resource expense of nuclear energy, renewable sources such as solar panels will be subsidized to be constructed in everyday households. So thank you for listening. We hope that this was an educational and inspirational experience for you all.
Thank you. It's a wonderful talk. And congratulations again for such in-depth and comprehensive research. And congratulations for publishing your ideas and your research results. This project cannot be accomplished without mentorship of Professor Jonathan Zhang. And for those who do not know, Professor Jonathan Zhang is a principal scientist of JPL and Caltech. He's managing a team of 30 scientists. He has published numerous papers, and he has mentored a lot of students, including many high school students. And Jonathan Zhang will have conversations with the students. Let's welcome Jonathan Zhang.
Okay, so thank you very much for the presentation. And let me comment these three students. And these three students, Jenny, Mary, and Carrie, they joined the project. They are barely 15 years old. Okay, so I want to thank them for the very hard work and over the past 2 years. And they, the climate change solutions is not easy. Okay, and the issues are very complicated. In fact, when those students read up the paper, they submit to the journal. And journal editors, they don't believe this is done by high school students. Okay, so they have a very hard questions, to me, and also to the student. And in fact, the first submission was not accepted. And then we went through the major revision. We submitted again, and to the frontiers of climate, and which is still currently in the review. But I'm very positive this can be published and after peer review eventually. And so I also have a word to the parents of these 3 students. I want to thank the parents very much to support the student. And as you can see, never underestimate the minds of our children. Okay, so they do have a great mind. Actually, in fact, and as I talk to the student, when they grown up, furthermore, especially when they finish the college, and I'm pretty sure they can form a company and startup company, such as think tank. Okay, they can put together, they can provide and advice on the policies, on the science and technology to the government and also to the industry and as a whole, because they went through the process and of writing this paper. So actually they know a lot. Okay, they are becoming the expert and on the climate solutions. All right, so and without further ado, and I would like to ask some challenge question to each of the students. Okay, so I start with Carrie. Okay, Carrie, and so when I listen to your analysis, and so you have a chart, and so you mentioned there's 2 ways. Okay, and so we can reduce the greenhouse emissions, and so one is called the carbon tax, and another is called a cap and trade systems. And could you summarize the different pros and cons of these 2 solutions?
Yes, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. I'm actually glad that you brought that up. So as I explained, the cap and trade system has both a cap and a trade aspect, whereas the carbon tax only has the taxing aspect. It's really proportional. It's really strict. 1 ton is that much tax. 2 ton is 2 times that much tax. You can't really change it. Whereas cap and trade has a lot more flexibility in that you have the trading aspect, so companies can trade the allowance with each other. So there's not really a set amount of cap for a company set by the government, because the cap can change due to the trade aspect. Whereas the carbon tax system is rigid, it's not flexible. So those are the pros and cons of carbon trade and carbon tax.
I see. And when I listen to this, and if I'm government officer, let's say, and I may argue, tax system is easy to manage. Okay, it just say the tax. Okay, but carbon trade system may be difficult because you need you involve negotiation of different partners and different companies, right? Is that? Do you agree?
I would actually disagree, because carbon tax is really hard to come to a consensus of how much you want to tax per ton for all the companies in the country, because once you set a national carbon tax rate, the whole country has to follow that. And not all the companies are the same. They're not the same size. They don't produce the same amount of carbon. So it's really hard to determine that rate. Whereas cap and trade, you can evaluate the firms on a case-by-case basis.
I see.
So like the government can set this amount of cap for this company and that amount of cap for that company. And even after that, they can still trade that cap with each other. So it's really a lot more flexible for cap and trade.
I see. So in your opinion, cap and trade is better system, right?
It's more flexible, but carbon tax also has its own pros in that it has carbon tax has a lot more return on revenue because it's a tax, right? So you get a lot more tax revenue if implemented, and you can use that revenue on other things.
I see. So to be more effective, maybe we can use both systems, right? And it depends on the case, and all depends on different company or the country. Is that the case?
Yes, I agree. That could be possible.
All right. Okay, so the second question I'm going to ask Mary. Okay, now in your presentation, you mentioned different type of reusable energy. All right, so after that, could you recommend which type of reusable energy is the best and why?
Okay, so yeah, I mentioned two categories of energy, renewable energy and nuclear energy. Both energy types have their pros and cons, but I think that there's a lot of debate in the energy sector about which type of energy to use. There's a lot of disunity in labor and waste of energy among scientists and politicians, which is not optimal for the mitigation of climate change, obviously. So I think that a coexistence of different types of renewable energy allows for these clean energy forms to be utilized to their maximum potential. So for example, nuclear plants can be established away from residential areas where they are most effective, and to compensate for the inflexibility and high time and resource expense of nuclear energy, renewable sources such as solar panels will be subsidized to be constructed in everyday households, and wind energy plants can be constructed in areas away from residential households.
I see. So there's no such a way as the absolute best, but it's going to depend on application and case, right?
Yeah. So much like Carrie's answer, every solution has its pros and cons. So the best way we can utilize these pros and minimize the cons is by implementing certain strategies in different areas.
I see. Okay, very good. So the final question I'm going to ask Jenny. Okay. Now, and you mentioned near the end of the presentation, there's optimal combinations, right? Okay. So if I walk out and I talk to my neighbor, hey, my student, read a paper, and they summarize the optimal combinations, blah, 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 to solve the climate change. My neighbor may ask me, hey, how does it affect me? Okay. Why this is a solution? What is the impact of these solutions, to the individuals? So Jenny, the question is, could you summarize how those optimal combination affects the people personally?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, because a lot of the times when we propose something, if it doesn't really affect people individually, they might not take as much attention into the subject as they might have if it does affect them individually. So I have some points actually about the optimal combination. So first of all, it would definitely bring in more food than what we have right now in terms of food insecurity. So for this point, it might not impact as much to one person who are maybe like more economically stable than another. So for example, some of the people that are like in really bad poverty in Africa may experience this change much more, where as more food are being brought in, say by bioengineering crops or afforestation and that kind of stuff, they would see a significantly increase in the food they will be able to use. Whereas people, say, for example, in Beverly Hills, they may not notice the change in this level of food at all. And then the second point is that people would experience a much cleaner air or better health. And also environment in response, because let's say that we have afforestation and reforestation. That's basically the increase in forest areas and trees. Then as the increase of trees goes on, we would basically see more carbon dioxide being extracted from the atmosphere. And then let's say that you're in a city that's really densely polluted, say in China, then the increase of trees would be able to generate a cleaner air, and with the cleaner air, people will be able to have a better health and so on. And then next point would be that overall, the optimal combination is to lessen the effect of climate change, which would include lessen the effect of natural disasters. So as we can see right now in Florida, we have a bunch of flooding. So and then as things goes on, maybe more wildfires or earthquakes. And so these natural disasters can be avoided potentially if we implement these technologies effectively and efficiently. Then this way we can basically decrease their frequencies and then save more lives. And then the next point would be that we would have a lesser spike in prices of consumer goods or just goods in general, or the economic depression, because as products becomes more and more scarce, the prices would go up and up. So by kind of like balancing the effect of climate change and what we can do, we can lessen the kind of like the drastic effect of this
I see.
effect from climate change. And then kind of like an overall effect would be that people would generally be more aware of this issue of climate change. And because people would be more aware, they would be more, in a way, more willing to help with this cause. And that can basically generate and accelerate the cycle of our optimal combination and then basically promote the benefits for all.
I see. So, and when this, and so this solution are implemented, and essentially every people will feel something, right? So it's better to educate people, let them be prepared as a change is coming. And nevertheless, climate change is coming. So we need some solutions as well. And thank you very much. This is very good answers, I think, especially from high school student. And once again, I'm very impressed. And it's funny when I look back, when I take you straight into study, I actually didn't expect you come from the same last name as John. Okay, so now I do believe, three of you combined together, maybe you can form a company. Maybe you can start now. It's something called John Consulting Inc., something like that. And it's going to have impact. Now, in fact, if any audience and either from the industry or from the individual, if you want to ask any question about climate solution, what you should prepare, what you should do, and your company should do in the future, ask these three experts. And they are really becoming an expert now. And in summary, I should say, and after I work with students, and I'm more confident to say, and our future, and it depends on you. And because of your hard work, and our future is safer. And thank you very much. And Jingxin, go back to you.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan, and thank you for our speakers, and thank you for everyone attending this meeting. And let's expect for our next talk. Bye, everyone.
Right. Okay, bye-bye now. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah.